Hey everybody, greetings from a rooftop in Morocco. Yes, in Morocco. If you take a look, one of the really cool things about Morocco is that in the old city, in what they call the Medina, everything's walled off, but then there are actually openings. Let's see if I can show you this. That then open into the houses. And so that goes all the way down to the ground, and that's where I've been staying the last few days. And I'm getting ready to depart Morocco. Matter of fact, I leave Morocco tomorrow, and this got me thinking about immigration. Right before I left for Morocco, one of my former students actually sent me a message. He had been in Italy for a few weeks, and now he was about to re-enter the US, and he's like, how does that work? And I realized, for a lot of people who haven't traveled overseas, that can be a little bit confusing. Even when you've traveled overseas, it's sometimes confusing. And it can be a little nerve-wracking. So I thought I'd dedicate this video to immigration. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky topic. It's tricky because immigration really varies from place to place. And I don't always even necessarily mean country to country. It can also really vary airport to airport, city to city. So let's start with before you get to the country. So first of all, it's important to note that having a visa does not guarantee you entry into a country. Now, as an American, a lot of countries I don't even need a visa for, but there's always a little bit of angst because it's never guaranteed, even with the visa, that they're going to let you in. That having been said, I've never had any problems, and I don't know anybody who's had problems entering any country other than the U.S. And the people I know who had problems entering the U.S. was not an American. But anyway, so then when you get to your destination, the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you're following the signs. You might have been given a card on the airplane. This is one of the things that's really changing. It used to be very common, and for the United States always, that you would get this customs declaration card. Matter of fact, one time I had a Customs and Border Patrol officer when I was entering the US not believe me when I had put like $20 for the amount of stuff I was bringing back into the country. But nowadays I have global entry, and so entering the US, I use a kiosk. But even for people who don't, a lot of the airports have kiosks that you fill out your customs form. That's also true in a lot of other countries, so it's really variable. I believe I had one when I went to Australia in 2019. I think that was the last time that I actually encountered a paper form. Hey everybody, future Kristen interrupting. I have now returned to the United States. This is in my living room. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on what I encountered with customs on my return. I had a long layover in London where I left and got to explore London and had a hotel, which meant I had to go through immigration in London. There, it was really easy. As a U.S. citizen, I was able to go through a line that was very quick and easy where you just scanned your passport. There were a number of countries that could use this. I know the European Union and Canada were on this list, and there were a number of others. I think I have a picture of that, so if I do, I'll try to insert the picture. And then when I got back to the US, they did have kiosks for US citizens, but I went through the global entry and it was different than any time that I had done it in the past. In the past, I've had to scan my 4 fingers and then fill out some forms, look at the camera, they took a picture, then it would print out a slip. I would take that slip to an immigration officer. Sometimes they'd ask me a question or two. I know one time when I was returning from China for Christmas, the CBP officer was like, what do you do in China? I'm like, I work there. He's like, where do you work? And I'm like, Tsinghua Fuzhou Guoji Shuixiao. And there was another officer nearby, and he was like, can you say that? And the other officer's like, I can't even hear that or understand that, something about that. I mean, whatever it was he said, I knew he didn't mean he didn't hear me, but he didn't understand at all what I said. But this time, I simply went to a kiosk and I was directed to just look at it. And then it apparently did facial recognition. I didn't see my picture pop up. There was just an icon about it processing that kind of spun. And then when it finished, the woman there directed me to booth number 1. I walked up to where there was a notation on the floor to stop. So I stopped there. And then the officer was like, Kristen? I'm like, that's me. And so then I proceeded forward to where it said to stop next. And he's like, you're good to go. So I didn't answer any questions. I didn't get any papers. It did apparently run, like I said, facial recognition software. And I went to pick up my luggage to keep on going. And I know I had one when I entered South Korea in 2017. That was actually rather interesting because I boarded the plane, and as you boarded the plane, they were handing out the customs declarations. Now, I boarded the plane in Beijing. I was living in Beijing at the time. And so they were handing out customs declarations, and they handed me one in Korean. I got to my seat, and I looked at my declaration form and went, I don't have any idea what this says. So since the flight was China to South Korea, I spoke with the flight attendant in Chinese, but I asked her for an English form. So she's like, all right, I'll get you an English form. She came back a little bit later and she was like, I'm sorry, we're out of English forms. I brought you a Chinese form. Now, I don't read Chinese fantastically, but I read it a lot better than I read Korean. So I filled out the form. I was really nervous about it, and this is actually an important thing to note because this is also usually the case when you have to fill out a form. When I got into the immigration area, there were actually tables with more forms, and I found an English form. I did see that I'd filled it out correctly, but I just felt more comfortable submitting an English form with my English. I mean, I answered everything in English on a Chinese form, and that just seemed weird to me. So I refilled it out. Wasn't a big deal. Then I don't have any pictures or videos for you of any of the immigration areas, and this is because they don't allow them. Everywhere I've ever been, there are signs telling you not to take photos and video. Now, I have seen a photo that somebody I know took. Granted, they took it mostly of the floor. And I know here in Morocco, when I entered, they didn't seem to be upset about people being on their phones. Some places, there are signs, absolutely keep your phones away. And I highly recommend that you follow anything like that. When it tells you to do something, I recommend you follow the directions. When you're talking about international border crossings, just follow the directions. So usually you go through a passport control first. Important thing, make sure you have the address of where you're going to be staying. I had some friends when we went to Thailand, and they were like, oh, in Thailand it's so easy to find a place. We'll just go and find when we get there. And they were not allowed to go through immigration. They got pulled aside. When I landed here in Morocco, I hadn't filled out any papers. I stood in the line for non-Moroccan citizens. Check your lines. Sometimes U.S. citizens can go with some of the locals. Most of the time they have to go with the foreigners. Just make sure you read your signs. The good news is wherever you go, the immigration signs are in English. And so I went up to the counter, and there hadn't been any forms to fill out. And one of the questions the man asked me was, where are you staying? And he actually made fun of me. I was like, and then I went through my purse and took out a piece of paper with my first night's hotel information and handed it to him, and he was like, and just kind of mocking me. It was kind of weird, but you just let that kind of thing go. And then after you go through passport control, then you go and you pick up your luggage, and then you go through customs. Now, with customs, there are always two channels, red and green. The red is that you have something to declare. The green is that you have nothing to declare. I've only had to go through the red once, and that was in Australia because it said to go through the red channel if you had any medications. So I went through the red channel, but they just kind of pushed me through. They were asking a couple of questions, and I was like, yeah, I have an albuterol inhaler, and they're like, oh, go. And they just kind of pushed me through. But I did follow their directions. Every other time I've always been through the green. Sometimes you have to put your bag on an x-ray, sometimes you don't. And that can depend on the airport, but it can also depend on the customs officer. For example, when I entered Morocco, they were sending a lot of people through the x-ray, but they seemed to be not sending people, or mostly not sending people who had just small carry-on size bags. Now I had checked my bag, but it was still carry-on size, and they waved me around the x-ray, the x-ray machine. I've gone through x-ray in the US where I had a rather interesting situation. I was coming back from Europe, and I flew from Frankfurt to Anchorage, Alaska. I was living in Anchorage, and I was speaking with the agricultural control officer, and he asked me, do you have any meat? Do you have any beef, pork, chicken? No. Do you have this? No. Do you have that? What foods do you have? I was like, I have honey. And he's like, that's probably fine, but we'll have to check it. And then I was like, oh yeah, and I have dried fruit. He's like, oh, the dried fruit's not a problem. My bag went on the x-ray, and all of a sudden, this man's demeanor changed from friendly and pleasant to really rather mean. And over again, he was like, do you have any meat? No. No beef? No. No pork? No. No chicken? No. No sausage? No. That was the first time he mentioned sausage. He hadn't said sausage before the x-ray. And just again and again and again. And I'm like, what in the world? And I keep denying it. And here's the important thing. If you have something that's not allowed, if you declare it, you're fine. But if you don't, then there can be serious penalties. And so after I denied this over and over again, he goes, fine, let's open it up. And he opens up my suitcase, and he grabs for a plastic bag. And I was like, oh, that's face wash. And he pulls out what was inside the bag, and he goes, this is face wash? I'd mixed up the plastic bags in my bag. I was like, no, that's smoked Gouda cheese. And he looks at it, and he goes, smoked Gouda cheese. Thankfully, it was in English. He was reading the package. And he was like, this looked like sausage on the x-ray. Now, part of the problem is I had forgotten about the cheese, so I hadn't told him. Probably wouldn't have had this problem if I told him about the cheese. But the cheese was fine. He thought it was sausage. So then he was like, where's the honey? And so I was able to direct him to where in my suitcase the honey was. He opened up the honey. It was all homemade honey. It was from a friend's father and mother-in-law. And he was like, I just have to check to make sure there are no bee parts in it. And that's the big thing. There's no meat products allowed, including apparently the honey if there's little bits of bee in them. And yeah, so that's basically it in a nutshell. If you are returning to the United States, you have to go through immigration and customs in your first airport of arrival. So what you'll do is you will go through passport control, you'll get your luggage off of the conveyor belt, You will go through customs, then you will drop off your luggage. For a lot of a lot of airports and a lot of airlines, you just simply hand it to somebody waiting there at a belt. Sometimes you have to go to a desk for the airline, hand them the bag. Usually your bag has been tagged all the way to your final destination. If it hasn't, there are counters in that part of the airport where you can go and get your bag tagged for the rest of your destination. And then you have to go through security again. Now, I have TSA pre-check, and a lot of times there's no pre-check in that part of the airport. I really don't like taking my shoes off, so at least in Detroit, where I know there's no TSA pre-check, I've come in through Detroit quite a few times, and if I have enough time, I just go around to the regular security and go in through customs. If for some reason you don't have your boarding pass, your continuing boarding passes, maybe you're changing airlines. This has happened to me a number of times coming from Asia. The Asian airline hasn't been able to give me the boarding passes for the US airline. Then again, there are those ticket counters right there in that part of the airport. You don't have to go to the main counter. Anything else? I think that's really it. There is an interesting exception to this, mostly in Canada, but I believe there's also one in the United Arab Emirates, and there might be a couple of others. But I know in Vancouver and in Toronto, I've gone through it in both of these cities, you actually go through US Customs and Border Patrol in Canada, go to a special secured part of the airport, and then fly into your US airport destination as a domestic flight. Now, my dad says it's good to learn from your mistakes, but it's even better to learn from somebody else's. Don't make jokes with Border Patrol. Yeah, I did it in Canada with US CBP officer. I had a passport and it was about 8 years old, and in the picture I was about 50 pounds lighter than I was at the time. And as the officer was looking at my passport, I jokingly told him, "That's not me." Not a wise choice. Luckily, I actually had read the situation correctly. I had thought that this officer had a really good sense of humor, and in fact he did. So much so that he took my joke further, turning to his colleague and showing him my passport and going, "She says it's not her. What do you think?" At this point, my stomach has dropped to my toes. I'm like, what have I done? Eventually, they'd have to let me into the US, but I'm entering the US while I'm still in Canada. I may miss my flight to Anchorage. I was pretty nervous until they started talking about what they could do with me. And somewhere in when they were talking about what they could do with me, I realized that sure enough, I had read the situation correctly, and the officer did have a good sense of humor, and he was actually messing with me like I had messed with him. But I wouldn't do that again. All right, so make sure that you like this video. Please subscribe. I'm going to be doing a whole series of videos about my adventures in Morocco. Morocco's absolutely awesome, so you're not going to want to miss that. So make sure you click the notification bell as well so that you can get notified each time I release a video. I am aiming to release those every Tuesday. And if you notice this one doesn't have quite the same editing as some of the others, it's because I'm in Morocco and I don't have my computer with me, but I wanted to share this with you and share the beautiful scenery from this rooftop. There's chairs, lounge chairs. Lounge chairs are back behind me here. There you go. And yeah, so have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.